everything we've learned as white people and begin to adopt this worldview of African internationalism as our own. This means seeing the world through the eyes of the African working class. The topic of the study this evening is the history of anti-colonial resistance. In this period when African people are rising up and resisting the colonial police terror waged against their communities, it's important for us to understand the present day struggle in the context of the long history of resistance by African and colonized peoples everywhere. The purpose of these studies is to arm us to carry out the work of organizing other white people under the party's leadership to build the movement for reparations to African people. These studies are not just for information consumption, they're meant to inspire us to take action. Chairwoman Penny's presentation will be followed by 20 minutes for questions and answers. We welcome your questions. Please submit questions in the Q&A feature on the Zoom. It's at the bottom of your screen. The chat feature is not available. It's the question and answers. And if you are watching on Facebook or YouTube, please enter your questions in the comment section, and it will be addressed after the main presentation by Chairwoman Penny Hess. Penny Hess is the chair of the African People's Solidarity Committee. She was the first white person to answer the call of the African Revolution to build genuine white solidarity with the struggle for liberation by African people in the US and around the world. Penny Hess has been a member of APSC since its founding by the party in 1976. Under the leadership of Chairman Omali Yeshitela and the African People's Socialist Party, Penny has raised and helped popularize the demand for white reparations to African people. She wrote the book, Overturning the Culture of Violence, which details the complicity and participation of white people in the historical assaults and colonial violence against African and other oppressed peoples. Under the leadership of the party, Chairwoman Penny has spoken throughout US, Europe, and in Africa, calling on white people to join the movement for reparations as a revolutionary demand. Uhuru, Chairwoman Penny.
Start my video. Uhuru, thank you so much, Janice. And I really appreciate that introduction. And I want to, hold on one second. And I want to really thank everybody for coming on. And I think this is a very important period that we're living in. This is an incredible time in which everything is being exposed by the leadership of this incredible movement of the African working class. And as always, I want to begin by saluting my leadership, Chairman Omali Yeshitela, who is the leader of the African Revolution, who is the leader of the African People's Socialist Party and the African Socialist International. And in 1976, he and the African People's Socialist Party formed the African People's Solidarity Committee, of which I am the chair. I have the honor of being the chair of that incredible organization. He formed the African People's Solidarity Committee to answer the question, what to do with the white people? How does the African Revolution solve that problem? And he solved it, and the party solved it, by forming an organization of white people to extend the African Revolution into the belly of the beast, on the pedestal, the colonizer nation, into the white world, where we go as the voice of Black power in whiteface. And our work is to win other white people like ourselves to take a stand for genuine solidarity under the leadership of the African Revolution and for reparations to African people based on the reality that this system and the position that we have in the world is built on a system, a pedestal of the enslavement of African people, the assault on Africa, turning Africa and African human beings into commodities for sale, into work machines, worked to death for hundreds of years, for 600 years, and for the theft of African resources, African genius, African land, the land of Africa, which is still colonized today, and which is built on the genocide of the indigenous people, which was a popular genocide taken up by white people, just general, regular white people who participated in the genocide against the indigenous people and the theft of their land and the colonization of the majority of the people on the planet Earth. This is why the African People's Socialist Party formed the African People's Solidarity Committee. And I also want to salute Deputy Chair Omali Yeshitela, who's the incredible leader of the over 50 self-determination institutions of the African People's Socialist Party and so much more, who so many of us in the African People's Solidarity Committee are under her leadership, have the honor of working under her direct leadership. She is, as we say, the architect of the Black Power Blueprint, the project for political and economic power in the hands of the African working class that is unfolding and being built every single day here in St. Louis, where I am, and in other fronts around the US and in Africa where the party is. And I also salute all the leadership of the African People's Socialist Party and all the members. And to say that all of the leadership, the National Central Committee, their pictures are in the Burning Spear newspaper every single month that it comes out. It is not a secret. This organization is transparent. The people who lead it, it's not some shadowy organization. The people who lead it are out there on the front lines fighting for the liberation of Africa and African people everywhere. So I want to begin by saying that. And I salute all of you for coming, because this is an incredible time. This is a time when everything that white people have ever believed, have ever thought were true, is being challenged. It's being ripped wide open. And the whole colonial question, the whole reality of this nature of this vicious beast called parasitic capitalism, built at the expense of African, indigenous, and oppressed peoples of the world for our benefit, of which we are the colonizer nation, of which everything that we have comes at the expense of their suffering. And that we have an opportunity now. And I think if you came here tonight, you want to hear the world as it really is. And everything that I am saying, that I understand, comes from the understandings of Chairman Omali Yeshitela and African internationalism, the political theory or worldview of the African working class. So we're asking you, just forget everything that you ever thought you knew about the world and enter into this discussion to begin to see the world as it really is. And I want to say, as the chairman describes the world today, that, he calls white people the subjects of history. We write the narrative. We are the conquerors. Therefore, we write the history. And we're the stars of that history. We're the stars of that present. And the general reality of most of us, even of those who are conscious as white people, know that something's very bad in this world. We experience ourselves as the ultimate reality in the world. And yet this resistance, this incredible struggle being raised by all of those who have existed under the most brutal, vicious, violent system that has ever existed on the planet Earth, are rising up to shake this pedestal, to shake this to its very foundation, and to bring about the anti-colonial liberation of Africa and African people everywhere. This system, parasitic capitalism, America itself, has to go. And so, we want to be part of opening up our minds. And I can't say that that's something that's ever done. We always learn more. We have to internalize more about how African people and the African working class experience the world. So that's what we're going to talk about tonight. And you know, I was reading today in an article in the Wall Street Journal, and I just want to read this because it was talking about these statues that are being torn down. And as you know, of course, the chairman was saying, if you saw his presentation on Facebook this afternoon, he was saying that, you know, well, okay, it's fine if you want to destroy all the evidence of what this vicious system is doing and taking down the statues, but the reality is the statues are not enough. Colonialism has to go. The colonial state has to go. And, you know, so we're at this state of reckoning for white people to understand who we are and how do we how do we reconcile? How do we repair the damage? How do we really pay reparations? How do we rectify our relationship to the rest of the people on the planet Earth? And we know it's not by trying to grow our hair in dreadlocks or appropriating African or indigenous culture or going into those situations as a savior or anything else like that. But what we're called on to do is to go into white society to do what is our responsibility, to win other white people to reject our unity with white power and join the rest of the planet, join humanity, but under their leadership, jumping off that pedestal, turning loose our whiteness, which means our unity with our own ruling class, which is built on the oppression and the colonial domination, sucking the blood of everybody else on this planet so that we can have resources and feed our children. I wanted to just read this in an article that was in the Wall Street Journal today, and it was talking about how this struggle in Britain to tear down the statue of Cecil Rhodes, who was the conquistador, the British conqueror of the continent of Africa, and who wanted to see and basically Britain own Africa, as they called it, from the Cape to Cairo, from Egypt all the way to occupied Azania or South Africa. Vicious, colonial, just brutal butcher in Southern Africa who was responsible for the deaths and for the ongoing oppression of African people today. And also the statue of Winston Churchill, who also was a dog and a pig, a colonial, vicious colonizer who is very much loved by British imperialism. So the article was saying how these statues, this reality of colonialism is challenging Britain. And so the article said Britain has come late to an official reassessment of its history. British discussions about slavery, for example, have traditionally focused more on the country's role in abolishing the slave trade than on its earlier phase as a leading exponent. The country's colonial past isn't widely taught in schools, but remains a keystone of its identity. Britain has largely refused to face up to the problems associated with its imperial past because doing so, quote, would be traumatic, said Deanna Heath, a historian who specializes in Indian and colonial history at the University of Liverpool. Excuse me. Without empire, there's no British identity, she says. Without empire, there's no British identity. And so true, so true. So our identity is tied up with being the colonizer, with being the dominant force in a brutal world system built on parasitic capitalism. And that's what we're going to talk about tonight. And we want to, say that the chairman is talking about that colonialism must go, that it is a political and economic system backed up by the state that has the instruments of violence and coercion to continue to protect the status quo, the power in the hands of the white ruling class. So the colonial state power is still there. They can take down every statue. The US could even pay a little bit of so-called reparations to African people, but as long as colonialism is still intact, it is its nature to kill Africans, to imprison Africans, to maintain the conditions of colonial domination over the lives of African people. And that, you know, we can talk about, there's all this talk of defunding the police, but the fact is there's no way they're defunding the police. There's no way, you know, the chairman said today, they may want to call the police something else, but it's still, its function is to oppress African people. And it's not like even, this is new. In 2014, the US spent at least $75 million on police body cameras. Well, Africans are still being killed, murdered by the police 3 times a day. You know, so the fact is colonialism is still here. And so this is why the African People's Socialist Party exists. Its role is, it calls the Vanguard, the advanced detachment, the one that goes out in front of everybody else to lead the way. And what we see today are so many of the ideas and understandings of the African People's Socialist Party that it has fought for over 40 years of its existence, and even predating that to 50 years, to when Chairman Omali Yeshitela first entered onto the scene as a SNCC organizer and tore down that vicious colonialist mural that hung in City Hall, St. Petersburg in 1966, in which he was sentenced to 5 years in prison. He did that 50 years ago and more. So, you know, the party is the vanguard, and that's what that means. And it's made up of cadre, and it's committed to the interests of the African working class, to its interests and its leadership. And it is committed to the liberation and unification of all African people, and defines all Black people wherever they are on this planet as Africans, some of whom have been forcibly dispersed in this process of the assault on Africa and the kidnapping of African people, which is what built Europe, what built the wealth of the capitalist system and transformed Europe from a feudal country, from a feudal nation, white nation, into a capitalist one. So, you know, the thing that I want to talk about tonight is why there has to be that vanguard and what that means and why we have to be part of this. Yes, we can take a mass stand, we can go to a demonstration, but if we really want to see a world in which our children can actually live, in which those who follow us can live, if we want to say, I don't want to leave this world for anybody else, then we have to make a commitment to be cadre, to join the African People's Solidarity Committee, the cadre organization, that is meaning that we will do whatever is necessary to carry out our responsibilities in the African Revolution under the leadership of the African People's Socialist Party, and why that has to be. So I wanted to, and then I'm going to talk about this history of African and anti-colonial resistance that has gone on from day one, and you know, how it is that the African People's Socialist Party gives leadership to resistance, so that, you know, it just doesn't come and go, but it actually solves the problem so that African and anti-colonial resistance around the world can be channeled into one consistent trajectory that has the ability to destroy the state power of colonialism and imperialism inside the US and wherever it is, and where Africa can actually be liberated, and to have science that does that. And I want you to be part of this and to really begin to see all of the lies that this system tells us that we just love to believe about ourselves and about the world, and about how all we have to do is unlearn racism and everything will be fine, which is, isn't that absurd? Doesn't that keep us in the center? because African people, oppressed people, are struggling for political power over their lives. They were struggling for the return of their stolen land and resources. And frankly, they don't give a damn what you think or I think of them. But what stand do we take? What stand do we take around reparations, around being the voice of the African liberation movement inside of white society? So that's what we want to talk about. And I wanted to read a few pages first of this incredible book, Vanguard, The Advanced Detachment of the African Revolution, which is actually the political report to the party's 7th Congress, which took place in October of 2018 here in St. Louis. And the Congress is where the entire party comes together every 5 years to basically sum up and then say the way forward to adopt basically their 5-year plan for going forward to deepen the crisis of imperialism and continue to build and strengthen the African Revolution. So I'm going to start on page, if you had the study or you have the book, page 23 of the chapter, the first chapter that says the Vanguard, the Advanced Detachment. And I'm going to start on the 3rd full paragraph. And it says, comrades, this 7th Party Congress constitutes a firm salute to the indefatigable work of the African People's Socialist Party to forward the struggle for the liberation and unification of Africa and African people under the leadership of the African working class. The continued unrelenting dedication of our party to complete the Black Revolution of the 60s is alive in the theme of this Congress, the African People's Socialist Party Vanguard, Advanced Detachment of the African Revolution. Although our assertion that we are the vanguard and advanced detachment sets us apart from other organizations, it is not something said in contention with others. It is a declaration to you, the members of our party, calling on you to recognize the magnitude of your party membership and the role you have volunteered to carry out in the struggle for the liberation and unification of Africa and African people worldwide. An example of an advanced detachment is a unit or group of soldiers that goes out first to lead the way and pave the way for the army in battle. For our party, the advanced detachment or vanguard means that we have freely and enthusiastically stepped forward to lead the struggle for the total liberation and unification of Africa and our entire dispersed African nation wherever we are located. Unlike other African organizations on the planet, our party is very serious about seizing African state power on our African continent. This is Chairman Omali Yeshitela writing this in his book, Vanguard. Our goal is to wrest back our land, our stolen resources, and the value of our stolen labor under the leadership of the African working class in a liberated socialist Africa. We understand, and again, I'm reading from the Chairman Omali Yeshitela's book, Vanguard. We understand that no oppressed people has ever become free without the intervention of an organization of trained, disciplined cadre who are committed to winning liberation by overcoming every obstacle, including our own limitations. We are a party of professional revolutionaries. Our members have a variety of occupations. We're school teachers, barbers, construction workers, taxi drivers, and the like. We're also students, prisoners, office workers, and welders. We are cooks and even lawyers. But whatever our occupation, our profession is revolution. We're not dilettantes, simply committed to faddish political work in our spare time. In fact, our profession as revolutionaries guarantees that there is no time when we are not advancing the struggle for the liberation of our people. This is what it means to be the vanguard, the advanced detachment. The African People's Socialist Party was created to complete our revolution that had been crushed by a vicious US-led counterinsurgency, which is a war against the resistance and revolutionary struggle of oppressed and colonized peoples, a war waged by the imperialist power to maintain their power. That is called a counterinsurgency. And that's what happened to African people in the 1960s. So it is saying that that counterinsurgency defeated the Black Revolution of the 60s as it expressed itself globally. Therefore, not just in the United States, but in Africa and around the world. There was no other organization in the African world that both survived the counterinsurgency and took up the task to go beyond survival and mere adaptation to our inherited conditions of defeat. Our party was bent on advancing the revolution, the struggle for the total liberation and unification of Africa, and the forcibly dispersed African nation everywhere. We have done much advanced work to resolve the many theoretical issues that otherwise would have been left unresolved by the ruthless colonial capitalist defeat of our movement, just as the most important questions were surfacing in our struggle. Questions such as, what is colonialism? How can African people win? What kind of organization is necessary? Why is the party needed? And what is a party? What is the understanding of capitalism? These are the questions. And it was the party who determined that capitalism was built on the assault on Africa. It was built on the stolen labor of African people and colonization of the majority of the planet. So the chairman has said, we have chosen to be the advanced detachment of the African working class. We have chosen to be the vanguard. The chairman says, and I think this is really profound, our party understands that in order to change the world, to end our oppression, we must have the organizational vehicle to do so, and willing and trained cadre to carry out the task. This is why we are able to say African People's Socialist Party and Vanguard in the same breath. The African People's Socialist Party is declaring boldly our intent to forge the revolutionary process to defeat imperialism. We are not just talking, we are preparing to govern. We know parasitic capitalism was created and maintained through its cruel, rapacious attachment to our Africa and our people. Our intention is to overturn it and replace it through a worldwide socialist revolution based in the forcibly dispersed international African nation wherever we are located. The success of our party is the critical factor in the liberation and unification of Africa and the entire suffering African nation. It is not a little thing. It is for this reason we were able to report to our party's plenary in February 2012 that the building of the party is not only a crucial task of the African People's Socialist Party and our members, it is also the fundamental task of the African revolution in this juncture. And I just want to read one more little section here before I go into a PowerPoint that I want to show you. This is on page 27, if you have the same numbering that I do. And it's on the third full paragraph down on page 27, Vanguard, the Advanced Detachment, from the book Vanguard by Chairman Omali Yeshitela. I'm reading this so that you can understand what the African People's Socialist Party is, what its aims are, and what is its essential features, that it is willing to solve every problem, do whatever has to be done to govern, to win the liberation of Africa and African people, and its formation of the African People's Solidarity Committee, the white organization under its leadership, is part of that strategy. It is part of it. That's a front that we are asked and called on to be responsible for. So that's what we're talking about. But I thought this was really, really excellent. The chairman says, we are the party that constitutes an historical continuum from the previous era of the Black Revolution of the 1960s to its incipient resurgence today. He says, our mission has never been determined by the events of the moment. Events come and go. Elections are held, coups overturn governments, Police violence escalates from time to time. Our struggle faces setbacks, but the social system that has arisen from slavery and colonialism remains the same. This is the essential ingredient that must inform our analysis during each period. Our congresses and plenaries contribute to our ability to hold the line to protect, defend, and solve the problems of the revolution. This is what revolutionaries do. This is what a revolutionary party does. It is also true that the system of oppression under which the entire world and we live and struggle is a parasitic capitalist system that owes its existence to and is nourished by slavery and colonialism. The legitimacy of any movement of the oppressed must ultimately be judged by its opposition to slavery, colonialism, and the capitalist system birthed by slavery and colonialism. Africans and the peoples of the world suffer from a dictatorship of white nationalist imperialist bourgeoisie currently headquartered in the US. So, you know, I'm going to stop there, and I want to show a PowerPoint because a lot of us who are coming into political life right now, who are beginning to see the world and want to see the world, and you know, through the eyes of the African working class and oppressed and colonized peoples who want to rectify our relationship to African people and the people on this planet, we don't really know anything about history. I didn't. I learned history as I learned it in a Catholic university, you know, through the eyes of the colonial Catholic Church. And this is seeing it, you know, in a completely different way. So what I want to show is a little bit about some of the history of resistance to colonialism from African people and from others. And just to sum up why the chairman is saying that all resistance must be led by a party that takes it somewhere, so it doesn't just rise up and simmer back down when the cameras go away and forget about this. Because, you know, the resistance has risen to an incredible crescendo, and the US does everything that it can possibly do to defeat that, to wipe it out, to give it a few crumbs, but maintain the system of colonialism and imperialism, which is white power. So I just would like to show a little bit of this. So we'll start out with a history of African resistance and revolution. Next slide. And of course, saluting Chairman Omali Yeshitela, who has, again, everything that I know that I'm showing in this right now comes from the leadership, the analysis, the brilliant political theory of African internationalism created by, written by, deepened by every single day Chairman Omali Yeshitela, and carried out by, in practice, the African People's Socialist Party. Next slide. So the chairman, one of the things that he starts with is that the assault on Africa began 600 years ago. And it began with Prince Henry of Portugal, who began the onslaught on Africa, leaving Europe. Next slide. Which at the time was under feudalism, that it was poor, even the aristocracy of that period, you know, as the chairman always points out, when Columbus was trying to get funded to sail to, you know, he didn't know where he was going, but he ended up in the Caribbean and in what is now Haiti. And he wanted, you know, and he was the perpetrator of genocide against the indigenous peoples, opening up to stealing the entire North and South American continents and all the islands of the Caribbean as colonial lands and, you know, part of the colonial jewels of Britain, France, and other countries in Portugal and Spain. And, you know, that Europe was poor. And as the chairman says, when Columbus went to Queen Isabella of Spain, she had to hawk her jewels to pay for the voyage so he could go there. And she did that. That was her investment in the future of stolen land, genocide, enslavement. And so it was the assault on Africa, this assault that attacked, sent soldiers, sent British, whatever they want to call them, or first it was Portugal, then it was Spain, it was Britain, it was Holland, it was France, going into Africa, seizing and kidnapping African human beings, stealing their resources, stealing the gold, bringing it back to Europe, creating the wealth, immediately colonizing Africa, immediately creating a situation of driving the African civilization further and further inland through its kidnapping of African people and turning them into commodities for sale. This was completely tied to the beginning of capitalism inside of Europe and the amassing of the greatest wealth that the world had ever amassed in one place at one time before. So it was an incredible thing. And it's something that only Chairman Omali Yeshitela has truly brought home, the significance of this reality. They try to tell us in the history books that, oh yeah, well, US was great. It had a great economy in the very beginning, of the country, and when it became America and broke away from Britain. The only bad things, there were a few bad spots on that history, which was the treatment of the indigenous people and the enslavement of African people, but that was a sideline thing. That's what we're taught. But the reality is that was the essence of every dime, every nickel that Wall Street has, that the US government has, that British imperialism has, that French imperialism has, and that white people everywhere that we have gone throughout the world to be the colonizers that we have. And even the ability to enjoy democracy and not be serfs in Europe anymore, not be chattel owned by the aristocracy, but to be able to have our rights. Our rights come because the majority of the planet Earth is suffering the most brutal and genocidal repression imaginable. So let's go to the next one, please. So resistance was always there. And as the chairman says, that African people resisted the first time a white person, a white man set foot on the African continent and forced an African woman or man to do anything against their will. They fought back. And this is the Beja people of Sudan, and they are resistance fighters who have always fought against European colonialism and onslaught all the way back to the Roman Empire. They have fought forever. And you can look them up, the BEJA people. Jesse, could you do the next one? Queen Nzinga, who lived from 1583 to 1630, fought the Portuguese assault on Angola. This is a statue. This is the kind of statues that we want, the resistance fighters. This is in Luanda, Angola today. Queen Nzinga, she fought, led an army as an incredible African woman. She never compromised with allowing the slave traders, the kidnappers to come into Angola. She fought them constantly until the day she died. Next slide, Queen Mother Ya Asantewa of Ghana. She was in 1840 to 1921. Next slide. She is loved in Ghana today and seen as a hero. She also raised an army of 5,000 African people in what is now Ghana against British colonizers. She's very much loved. I believe this is a statue of her that's in a wax museum in Accra. Queen Mother Ya Asantawa. Next one. The Zulu Wars of Southern Africa in the 1800s. You might have heard of Chaka Zulu. They fought British imperialism for 100 years and defeated Britain's armies on many occasions, pushed back the ability of the British colonizers to come in to Azania. They fought brilliantly. Next slide. The Zulus fought white colonizers again for 100 years and defeated them. Next slide. The Matabele Wars in Zimbabwe in the 1890s fought against Southern Africa, the armies of Cecil Rhodes and British colonialism. And you can see they have spears. They also took rifles when they won, when they killed the colonizers. But it was these forces that the British soldiers the British invaders first used machine guns. They invented machine guns and slaughtered up to 5,000 Africans in one afternoon with just the incredible brutality of British and US colonialism. Next slide. The Mai Mai Wars in Namibia, 1905 to 1907. And Namibia was colonized by Germany. And most people don't know that even as Jews were citizens of Germany and the rest of Europe, Germany committed genocide in the most brutal way against the people, Africans, in what is now called Namibia. They called it Southwest Africa, that borders South Africa today. And that the people fought back, they fought fiercely, and the British used, or actually the Germans used guns and all kinds of weapons of mass destruction at that time to round up the people, to crush them, to round them up and leave them in the desert without any food or water, in which they were massively, genocide was committed against them before the word genocide even existed. And as the chairman has pointed out many times, the word genocide was not even a word until Europeans killed other Europeans in Germany in the 1930s and 40s. But yet this had been happening. Europe had been carrying out, every country, every imperialist power had been carrying out massive genocide against African people on the continent of Africa before that word was even used. And it was just considered norm. It's the norm. It's what Europe does. It's how they win their wars. This is, just really, really, really clear that the whole ideas that Hitler got of how to carry out genocide against a whole people, or, in the case of what they did to the Jews, they had already carried out. He studied what the United States did to the indigenous people and what Germany did to the Africans of what is today Namibia. And by the way, the Africans from Namibia have gone to Germany many times and asked for reparations and even an acknowledgement of that vile genocide against them. And Germany has repeatedly refused to do that. And I saw that actually that there was a big demonstrations in Berlin. So, these things are being raised now. Next slide. So also there was incredible history of African people captive in the US that fought the slave master, fought white power, fought their enslavement, their colonization that took the form of enslavement, and resisted and escaped daily. Next slide. The Stono Rebellion in South Carolina was one of the earliest one, which was a very, very brilliant rebellion, very well organized, that, as you can see, killed the slave masters, organized Africans, and it was crushed by the US military and all the weapons that the US had, but it was a brilliant rebellion. You can look it up in South Carolina. Next slide. Gabriel's rebellion in 1800, that Gabriel, sometimes called Gabriel Prosser, that was his slave name. He was a blacksmith. He actually was not enslaved. He had gotten free. He was a blacksmith, and he had organized an incredibly well-organized rebellion in 1800. And their aim was to go to Haiti, as many of them were. And we'll talk about the Haiti Revolution in just a minute. So next slide. The Louisiana African Rebellion of 1811 was one of the most massive rebellions. And there's a book about it that's out now that talks about it. It's really powerful. I call on you to look it up. I don't have my notes, so I can't say everything about it, but it was something that the Africans slaughtered, they killed, they resisted, they killed the slave master, which is the only way to free themselves. They killed them, they resisted, they marched from where they were in the plantation. They were marching to New Orleans, and their goal was to also go to Haiti. And they were crushed by the US military and the arms of the US, but it was a fierce and well-organized rebellion. Next slide. Telemak, who is also Denmark Vesey, was another African who was not enslaved at that time, who had won his so-called freedom, and that he also was influenced by the revolution in Haiti. And he organized an uprising. His goal was to take an entire boatload of African people and sail to Haiti. And that is a powerful story as well. So next slide. Of course, Nat Turner, the rebellion of 1831, the Reverend Nat Turner, who led a rebellion called, that his motto is strike at night and spare no one, that their organized resistance killed about 71, I believe, white people and slave masters, which is what the resistance has to do. It must kill the slave master in order to be free. And they just struck fear into the heart of white people who were slave masters and otherwise, and their whole families in Virginia and that area in 1831. Next slide. Yeah, so this is saying, so I do have a few notes here. It's saying Nat Turner's rebellion drove fear in the white slave masters and their families. Turner and 70 armed resistance fighters attacked 15 homes, killing 60 white people, including Turner's slave master's wife and children. Turner eluded authorities for a month. Next slide. He was ultimately hanged, but he was a brilliant leader. Again, a very well-organized resistance plan. And we're taught that these are minimal, this didn't really happen. No, this forms of resistance happened every single day, whether it was the Africans spitting in the food or taking a hat pin and sticking it into the back of the head of the white baby. All the things that Africans did to resist went on every single day. So there was also incredible resistance in South America and the Caribbean. And there's so much to say about this. This is actually part of a longer PowerPoint that we have that goes through every island of the Caribbean where there was amazing resistance and fighting, and also in Brazil and Guyana and other places in throughout South America and in the Caribbean. Every place there is a resistance hero that is much loved by the Africans of that part of the world. So this is just has a picture of Busa's rebellion in Barbados in 1916. Next slide. The Wolof Rebellion in San Domingo, which is actually what Haiti is, Haiti and Dominican Republic today, against Diego Columbus, who was one of the sons of Christopher Columbus, who was vicious, raped the women, the indigenous Arawak women on the island of Haiti, and they inflicted rabid dogs who chewed out, as they say, the entrails of the people as they were hanging, as they hung them by their hands. You know, just hideous things that he did. And the Wolof were people from West Africa who had been enslaved and fought against Columbus's son in 1522. Next slide. This is, you know, in the 1500s, 1600s, 1700s, and 1800s was ongoing resistance to colonial slavery, to colonialism and terror in Latin America and the Caribbean. This is one picture of a woman, Solitude, who fought and led African resistance against the French army of Napoleon on the island of Guadeloupe while she was pregnant in 1802. Afterwards, she was hanged by the French after she had her baby, which of course they kept as part of the enslavement. Next slide. The Maroon Wars of Jamaica, 1655 to 1738. It was actually not only Jamaica. The Maroons were incredible Africans that took territory in Jamaica and other places. They went into the hills. They went and took land, and also inside the United States, many of the resistance fighters, and they were called Maroons as well, that joined the Seminole people, the indigenous people of Florida. They fought together, joined hands, and some of who are called the Seminole, which was African and indigenous, actually went to Mexico, where they still exist today. The Maroon Wars of Jamaica, 1655 to 1738. Serious, serious wars for land, for freedom, for independence against the colonizer, against the white slave master. Next slide. One of the leaders of the Maroons, as is so often the case, was a woman, Nanny. She was the leader of the Maroons in 1722. And she was a Maroon leader. She was loved and recognized for her leadership and guerrilla warfare skills, and was part of winning land in the hills and mountains of Jamaica. Next slide. In Brazil in the 1600s, the leader of the Palmares Wars of Brazil, Zumbi is his name, and there are statues to Zumbi in Brazil, actually won land also in parts of Brazil that were held by Africans, and the Spanish, or I guess it was the Portuguese colonizers of Brazil, were driven out of those areas, and they held that land for many, many years. Very powerful resistance in Brazil. Next slide. The African Revolution of Haiti, 1791 to 1804. So this is the defining moment. How little do we even learn of this incredible, incredible revolution, the first anti-colonial and workers' revolution of the world that was successful, that in 1804 defeated Napoleon's army, drove him out of Haiti. And Napoleon's army of that time would have been equivalent of the US Army today, that had ramifications for the entire world. The Haiti Revolution made a constitution in which it was the most progressive constitution that had ever existed on the planet Earth, and much of what is considered a socialist society, you know, an equitable society, their constitutions are based on what Haiti took. Like, it took a stand, for example, that no child should be called illegitimate. Every child would be taken care of. They got rid of all of this dogma, this oppressive Christian kind of philosophy that is the justification for colonial domination around the world. They also said that anyone suffering oppression anywhere in the world was welcome in Haiti. And people did come from all over the world, including up to 4,000 or more Africans from the United States who were able to escape and came to Haiti. They were given a piece of land in Haiti and were able to live there under the asylum of Haiti. And also just that they named it Haiti, which was named after Haiti, which was the name of the indigenous people, that they would name it that is profound as well. And finally, that their constitution said that no white people can own land in Haiti, but all citizens of Haiti shall be known as Black. So therefore, if you become a citizen of Haiti, this is in 1804 in the Constitution of Haiti, after their liberation, if you become a citizen of Haiti, you are under the leadership of the African Revolution, of the African working class. That is your interest. You have no interest in upholding the colonial domination of African people. So it was incredibly powerful and brilliant in that way. It was led by first Toussaint Louverture, who unfortunately, after he won to a certain point, he believed that the French would negotiate with him. He got on the ship and they kidnapped him back to France and put him in a dungeon where he died. But the revolution was completed by Jean-Jacques Dessalines, who had the statement, "Coupez tête, brûlez caille," cut off their heads, burn their houses. And anything that the colonizers did to the Africans, they did it back 1,000 times over. They resisted. He was brilliant. He knew that African people had immunity, a certain kind of immunity to malaria. So he led Napoleon's troops, and it was actually the general was, I believe, the brother-in-law of Napoleon. He led them right into the swamps where he knew the mosquitoes would bite them. And it was really germ warfare in a sense. And thousands of these troops died of malaria because they did not have the immunity. And they fought brilliantly. They won their revolution, but it was attacked by the United States and France, who forced them, backed up by embargoes by the US, everything the US could do to attack Haiti. It has done ever since 1804. And it forced Haiti, Africans in Haiti, to pay reparations to France for their stolen property, which was African people. And they had to pay the equivalent today of $90 billion in solid gold, no cash or anything like that. They had to send solid gold to France, which is worth, just an incredible amount today. And that took them 100 years to do that. And that Haiti was once the richest island of the entire Caribbean, and the US did everything it could to strip it of its power, of its resources, and actually invaded at the turn of the 19th century, of the 20th century. It actually invaded Haiti, went in there, again, looted the coffers, looted the treasury of Haiti. And so now, you always hear, oh, Haiti's the most impoverished country in the world, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, because it was looted by France, by the United States, and by every other European country for over 100 years. This is what the US does. But the Haiti Revolution was the greatest revolution on the planet Earth so far. Next slide. So it was led by, as I said, Toussaint Louverture, Jean-Jacques Dessalines, who's on the right. Next slide. So in 1492, I just want to also talk about the resistance of the indigenous people. Columbus invaded the Caribbean and immediately began the genocide. This is a picture of Columbus or his son and what they did to the indigenous people on the Caribbean islands, which they considered a paradise. They raped the women. They did everything they could. They hung people. They hung the indigenous people from, this kind of setup here, and then built fires under them. They also sicked dogs on them while they were that, and killed them in a slow way, just in a brutal, brutal, vicious way. Next slide. The indigenous resistance wars started on the continent, or actually in what is now North America, beginning in at least 1609. I'm sure the resistance was before that, but 1609 was the beginning of what they call the Indian Wars. Next slide. So there was the Apache fighter Goyakala, Geronimo, known by Europeans as Geronimo. He was incredible. He was actually in the early or late 19th century and early 20th century. He was a brilliant, brilliant genius of a fighter and resistance fighter that kept out the colonizers from the Apache territory out west for many, many years, until he was finally captured after years by US imperialism. Next slide. Tecumseh was another brilliant indigenous fighter who wanted to form a confederacy of sorts of indigenous peoples from throughout the Midwest and the East Coast. He was so brilliant. He was a brilliant fighter. He was a brilliant orator. He was a strategist. He was an incredible force. And, he was, that white people admired him even as they killed him, but they admired him. And William T. Sherman, the US Union general that burnt Georgia from Atlanta to Savannah at the end of the US Civil War, his middle name was Tecumseh. The T stood for Tecumseh because his father was an admirer, even as, he wanted to kill him, but he knew that he was a powerful, powerful force. So you should read about Tecumseh. Next slide. Crazy Horse was an incredible general, a incredible military force who was responsible for killing William Armstrong Custer, as what is called his last stand at Little Bighorn in Montana in 1876. Totally wiped out the entire cavalry of the US that went in there at that time, in a brilliant battle that's studied by US military forces even today. Next slide. I also wanted to raise this. This was actually in the 1500s, so it's going back, but just how we're always taught how wonderful Magellan is. I mean, maybe it's because I went to a Catholic university. For some reason, they're always putting forward Magellan and how brilliant he was. And, of course, he colonized, among other things, the Philippines. He went into the Philippines with his troops from Spain and began the colonization of that through massive rape and murder of the people of the Philippines. And so he kind of left for a while. He sailed away with his troops. He had raped the women. He had, just done all the same things that colonizers do, incredible, intense violence against the people to capture them, to subdue them, to have counterinsurgency against them. So he went away for a couple of years and he came back. He came to the island, which is now, in the Mindanao area, in that group of islands in the Philippines. And he came back. Of course, the ship was in kind of a natural harbor, but he decided to just get off the boat and walk in the water, walk through the water, the shallow water, into and come back, and thinking he would be treated as a god. And this is a picture of Lapu-Lapu and others who came with him, but he was the leader. This is a statue of him that's in the Mindanao area. of the Philippines, went out into the water and just chopped up Magellan. And it said the water ran red. You know, just that Magellan would come with the arrogance of white imperialism, with white arrogance, like these people are going to love me, even though I've done every possible horrible thing to them. They fought back, they resisted. It was fierce. It was incredible stand of resistance against that domination of Spanish colonization of the Philippines. The next slide. No, in the 1916 through 1940 was the Marcus Garvey movement in the United States. This is something that we don't learn in our history books. We don't learn about this. But this was one of the most incredible movements of African people that has ever existed on the planet Earth. Marcus Garvey's organization had a membership of 11 million African people around the world. And in 1920, their organization held the first convention, they called it, of the Negro people of the world. And the first few days of that convention was at the Madison Square Garden in New York City. This is before there was any social media, before there was airplanes, but African people came from every country of the false borders of Africa. They came from every Caribbean island. They came from Guyana and Brazil and every place that African people are around the world. They came to this in August 1920, 100 years ago. If you are, by the way, if you are a subscriber to the New York Times, you can look in the archives and see the articles they wrote about it. That it was really, really amazing what they did and what this was. And 25,000 to 50,000 people were there at that Madison Square Garden event in 1920. African people on the streets of Harlem, which was the base of his organization. It was incredible. Next slide. So Marcus Garvey movement, this is a parade. This happened at the beginning of the UNIA, the Convention of Negro People of the World, New York, 1920. This is on the streets of Harlem in 1920. This is amazing, amazing. African people from all around the world and all over the United States. Next slide. And the premise of the Marcus Garvey movement was Africa for Africans, at home, meaning in Africa, and abroad, meaning wherever they have been forcibly dispersed around the world. That was their goal. And their program was of self-determination, creating political and economic power in the hands of the African working class. They had their own passports. They had their own steamship line. They had their own recording studios and hotels and universities. And, you know, in fact, I saw someplace on the internet a map of Harlem with little dots of where all of the Garvey institutions were in the 1920s. It was really incredible. And that the white left, the Communist Party, and neo-colonial Africans worked together with the US FBI, which is how it got its start, to frame up Marcus Garvey and send him to prison. His leadership was so profound around the world. I mean, there's so much to say about him. I urge you to read a book. One of the best books about Garvey that the Chairman Omali Yeshitela has recommended is called Race First by Tony, what's his last name? Anyway, somebody will say. You can put it in the chat. All right, next slide.
Chairwoman Penny, you have 3 minutes left.
Okay, next slide. Okay, so the Mau Mau Rebellion in Kenya was the liberation movement against British colonialism. And they were an incredible force that struck fear in the British colonizers of Kenya. There's a lot to say about what the British did in Kenya, but next slide. but they hanged the people, they rounded up the Kikuyu people who led the resistance, and this is Dedan Kimathi, who was the leader of that. They took broken glass and stuffed it into the anus of African men and into the vagina of African women. They actually had hearings on that in Britain about maybe 4 or 5 years ago, in which survivors of that, who are now very old, came and testified. You can read about that on the internet, read what Britain did, this nice, gentle, tea-sipping Britain did to the people of Kenya to keep them subdued and to keep colonialism in power. But the resistance was fierce. It was brilliant. Dedan Kimathi was an incredible guerrilla fighter. Next slide. The Black Revolution of the 1960s, the Black Panthers, Chairman Omali Yeshitela, who brought the struggle and transformed it from a struggle for civil rights to a struggle for power, for political power, which took it into the realm of an anti-colonial struggle. The Black Panthers, the organization led by the chairman, was called the Junta of Militant Organizations, or JOMO, which is a precursor to the African People's Socialist Party. That movement was crushed by the COINTELPRO, the counterinsurgency, which assassinated the leaders such as Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, and imprisoned African leaders such as Sundiata Acoli, who's still in prison today at 83 years old, and destroyed the organizations, infiltrated them, slandered them, and ended up also pumping heroin and crack cocaine into the African community, taking away all their political and economic institutions that existed in the African community prior to that, creating a massive imprisonment of African people and militarized police forces that we see today. Next slide. And that's what the African People's Socialist Party has led, the struggle to complete the African Revolution of the 1960s. So I'm going to need about 5 minutes or so more. If you just bear with me, we need a few more minutes here. The Black Revolution of the 1960s was incredible. Next slide. And at the same time, the struggle was going on in Azania and throughout the continent of Africa, which we don't have time to talk about here. Next slide. But led by the Pan-Africanist Congress of Azania, the Sharpeville massacre in South Africa, which is something that sparked an intensification and growth of the anti-colonial struggle against British colonialism in what is still called occupied Azania today, and the introduction, as in the United States, of neo-colonialism, Africans who carry out the will of the colonial powers that continues the oppression of African people, both inside the US and around the world. Next slide. In Namibia, which we talked about before, where genocide was carried out by the Germans, there was SWAPO, Southwest African People's Organization, the struggle by Sam Nujoma, who is there on the right, the leader of that. Chairman Omali Yeshitela went to Namibia, was invited to Namibia several years ago, and he spoke on TV. He was hosted by Sam Nujoma, who was already retired, but had been the president of liberated Namibia for many years. So that was a great, powerful historical legacy of the African People's Socialist Party and the African Socialist International. Next slide. Revolution in Angola and Mozambique in the 1960s and 70s against Portuguese imperialism, very powerful. Next slide. And I, wanted to also say, and we don't have time to talk about it, but I would like to sometime talk about the Chinese Revolution and how incredible that was. I really urge you to read Red Star Over China, read the works of Mao, and also to see film. I thought I had a link in there, maybe it was in the notes, of the Long March, of how the Revolutionary Army, the Red Army of China, had to leave. They had to make a strategic retreat as they were under attack by US-backed Chiang Kai-shek forces. And they had to march for a year through the mountains, the Himalayan mountains, to desert, to over hill, and crossing many rivers. And they did this. It was amazing, and came out as the victorious force. Chairman Mao became the leader, the official leader of the Chinese Revolution during that process. It is amazing. It's because they had a party of the Chinese working class. The Chinese Communist Party was in the leadership of that revolution, and they won. Next slide. Also in Vietnam, the Vietnamese Revolution is amazing. This is an iconic photo from the Vietnam War that shows a Vietnamese woman fighter, and just bringing down the big lug of US imperialism. And they defeated the Japanese, they defeated the French, and then they took on US imperialism and won. And if you have an opportunity to see some of the films that were on NPR, the Vietnam War, some of it is, it's a lot, of course, from the point of view of the US imperialism, but they also allow the Vietnamese to speak and to say their analysis of it. So it's worth it to see that, and also to see how that was going on at the same time that the African Revolution was taking place inside the US, and the US was in one of its deepest crises that it's ever faced up until today, that we see the deepening crisis of imperialism. Just next slide, next slide. So we see the African Socialist International, Chairman Omali Yeshitela, and Secretary General Luwezi Kinshasa, who is responsible for organizing the African People's Socialist Party in Africa, all throughout Europe, and in the Caribbean, and around the world. Next slide. The Battle of St. Petersburg, 1996, after 18-year-old Tyrone Lewis was murdered by the police. Then there was incredible resistance led by the African People's Socialist Party. There's a video called Battle of St. Petersburg, which I hope that we can show sometime. This picture here was actually in the newspaper, in the St. Petersburg Times. These are cops with Africans going hand to hand with them. It was an incredible resistance. And, the police attacked them. They sent 300 armed SWAT teams to attack the Uhuru House during a regular meeting 3 weeks later of the International People's Democratic Uhuru Movement. They emptied all of the tear gas that existed in the city of St. Petersburg onto the trees around the Uhuru House and into the Uhuru House, where over 100 people were gathered for a meeting, including children, old people. People couldn't breathe, they couldn't get out. And they attempted to burn down the Uhuru House that night. And it was the people, the resistance of African workers surrounding the Uhuru House that were incredibly, incredibly courageous, and took it on and actually brought down a police helicopter that was flying overhead. So next slide. Occupied Azania, the party has forces there, Tafari and Asa. These are some of the forces taking on and building the African People's Socialist Party in Gauteng province, in the townships, and with a goal of building all throughout the entire false border of Occupied Azania, which is South Africa. Next slide. 7th Congress of the party, which we just talked about. And this is summing up the Vanguard, the advanced detachment. So I'm going to end it there. I'm going to just really want to, hope that we can have a discussion, and to say that it is an incredible honor to be under the leadership of this African Revolution, to see how the African People's Socialist Party claims the entire history of African resistance and the resistance of people, oppressed people around the world, to see the incredible internationalism of the African Revolution, which the party has stood with the Palestinian people and the right of the Palestinian people to their land. They stood with and stand today with the Mexican indigenous people and Unión de Barrio, their fraternal organization that they have worked with for more than 35 years, the oppressed and colonized people around the world. The African People's Socialist Party stands with them and is the internationalist force for world revolution, carrying on the shoulders of the African working class the struggle to defeat imperialism once and for all, and to liberate Africa, to liberate the indigenous people and oppressed and colonized people on the planet Earth. It has offered a place for us to join the revolution, to stand in solidarity and fight for reparations to African people. Our future, we want to be part of a future in which Africa is free, the indigenous people are free, and oppressed and colonized peoples create a world without war, without oppression, in which human society can thrive for the benefit of the working class and oppressed people. This is the future of the planet. Imperialism must go. Uhuru.
Uhuru, thank you so much, Chairwoman Penny. That was a fantastic history lesson of the fierce resistance of African people and profound analysis. It's really mobilizing. And I just want to introduce the African People's Solidarity Committee Secretary General, Allison Haney, at this time. Uhuru, Allison.
Uhuru. I'm pressing start my video, but it's not doing it. Uhuru.
I think Jesse has to do that.
Okay. I'm not sure, Jesse. Can people hear me?
Now we can hear and see.
Uhuru. Uhuru. I just really want to salute Chairwoman Penny Hess for that brilliant presentation, powerful presentation that takes the covers off our history as North Americans, as white people, as Europeans, and, you know, shows the incredible resistance of African and indigenous people that has never stopped, not for one day since Europeans invaded Africa, as Chairwoman Penny Hess just showed us. And that was powerful, Chairwoman Penny, and I just want to salute you and your leadership. Chairwoman Penny Hess, as Janice said, has been the leader of the African People's Solidarity Committee since it was started, since its inception. It was founded by Chairman Omali Yeshitela and the African People's Socialist Party in 1976. So for 44 years, Chairwoman Penny Hess has led in building and forging the African People's Solidarity Committee in the white community throughout the US and Europe and wherever we are as white colonizers. And that's been a profound stance, and we salute our leader, Chairwoman Penny Hess. And I wanted to talk to you briefly tonight after that incredible presentation about joining the African People's Solidarity Committee and why we should join it and what its significance is. And I truly appreciate what Penny was saying at the beginning of her presentation too, about the significance of the African People's Socialist Party. We are an organization, the African People's Solidarity Committee is an organization of the African People's Socialist Party. We don't exist separately from it. We're a cadre organization that was formed by the chairman in 1976 for white people to take the most profound stand that we can in this historical period under the leadership of the African Revolution, under the Vanguard leadership of the African People's Socialist Party. And I want to salute Chairman Omali Yeshitela, his incredible leadership for 50 years building and forging the African Revolution since the defeat of the Black Power movement of the 60s, as Penny showed us. And not just rebuilding the Black liberation movement, but propelling it forward in history to a point where it's never been before. And, you know, for the leadership of Deputy Chair Ona Zanea Yeshitela and the entire Central Committee of the African People's Socialist Party, because it's their leadership that has called on us and made it possible for us to take a stand of genuine solidarity and for reparations for African people so that we can, you know, really address this history. And understand that this didn't just start, as the chairman says, with the brutal cold murder of George Floyd. This has been a 600-year history of resistance. But this is a new period because there's never been until now, until recently, the leadership, the Vanguard Party of the African working class, leadership of the African People's Socialist Party. So the African working class doesn't just have to have these rebellions after rebellions after rebellions. It has the revolutionary leadership based on science that is guiding it, and the organizational capacity to defeat colonialism, to defeat this vicious social system that oppresses African people. And they have formed the African People's Solidarity Committee so that as North Americans, as Europeans, as part of the colonizing nation, we have a role to play, and we can play that role under their leadership. The chairman, talked about, the 60s, the African Revolution of the 60s, and how, profound it was. But there was there was a call in that period by the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee for white people to stand with the Black liberation movement and raise resources, pay reparations, participate under their leadership. And at that point, white people, we chose not to do that. We chose to discover the women's liberation movement, modeled after the Black liberation movement, coming after it, but not under its leadership. We chose the gay liberation movement, and we found the anti-war movement. But so that's why the chairman brilliantly formed the African People's Solidarity Committee in 1976, right at the height of the war against the African Revolution of the 60s, the Black Power movement, formed the African People's Solidarity Committee. So we had to work under their leadership and could be genuine solidarity, a force of genuine solidarity in the white community. And they formed our organization so that we would go back into the white community. We would be another front of the African liberation movement in Black power, in white face, in the white world, in the colonized world. So this is an incredible honor. It's a tremendous, just brilliant thing to be part of this organization that's under the leadership of the African People's Socialist Party, that is liberating African people day by day by day as we see and experience it. But I just wanted to say, we wanted to make clear to people, because a lot of people think, well, I'm in a Uhuru Solidarity Movement. Isn't that the same thing? Aren't I then a member of the African People's Solidarity Committee? And it's not the same thing. It is a different organization. APSC is the organization that was formed by the African People's Socialist Party to be a cadre organization. And if you want to know what a cadre white person is, look to Chairwoman Penny Hess. She has forged what this looks like for all of us to be able to follow and see, of what it means. And, what part of what it means is that, as the chairman says, a cadre organization, and as Penny said, goes all the way. It's not about, one day I feel like I want to support Black power. The next day I want to go on a month-long vacation in Honduras or something. It's like, it means we really have to merge our interests as white people, as Europeans and North Americans, as colonizer nation people. We have to merge our interests with the interests of the African working class and the African Revolution. So we don't have a separate interest. It's not like we have our own agenda over here, but we support, African people having self-determination or something. It means it's a real serious commitment and demands, the African People's Socialist Party founded APSC based on the science of African internationalism. So it's based on science, and it's a revolutionary organization, and it's directly under the leadership of the African Revolution. And that's what we need to do. We need to join this movement. And it's fantastic. We salute everybody who's a member of the Uhuru Solidarity Movement. You're doing incredible work. And a lot of the leaders of the Uhuru Solidarity Movement, whether they're in APSC or not, do the work of do cadre level work. A lot of people do. But then you need to come into APSC, because this is the cadre organization under the party's leadership. And that means, you know, we go deeper, we commit to go the whole way. We want to see African independence in the chairman's lifetime just as much as the party wants to see that. You know, this is what we want, as Chairwoman Penny said. This is the only way we can really take responsibility and change this history in the most serious way, because it's not going to be, you know, obviously it's not going to be fighting racism or, you know, wanting to support Black Lives Matter. That does not change anything. We want to change and destroy this colonial system and get it off the backs of African people. We want to see a world of socialism and justice for all people. And that's what the African People's Socialist Party and the African working class are forging. So we want to call on you, if you want to take that stand, if you're interested and want to learn more about what it means to be a cadre, we want to call on you to join the African People's Solidarity Committee. And really, in a lot of ways, that is the organization that nobody knows much about. And that's why we're coming out of the closet. We want to show everybody who APSC is. It's an honor, profound honor, to be in this organization under the party's leadership. And we have work to do. We have serious work to do, because we have to lead. Right now, the consciousness of Europeans and white people all over the world is waking up. People can't pretend this isn't happening anymore, you know, and people want to do something about it. But you're not going to just do something about it by going to protests. You have to be in a revolutionary organization under the leadership of the African Revolution itself. So we want to call on you if you want to find out more about APSC, and if you want to join APSC and really commit that our lives have to mean something. We want to turn this around. We don't have a lot more time. We have to do it now, because the African liberation movement, the revolution, is happening now. And we want to be part of that in the most principled way that we can under the party's leadership. So join APSC. If you're interested, you can go to apscuhuru.org. That's our website. There's, you know, a join form right there. You can send that in. It's very, very easy and simple. And what will happen is, to join APSC, you're brought through a political process. None of us are born cadre or, you know, deeply African internationalist leaders. We become that under the party's leadership. We become cadre. We take responsibility. We lead work, you know, and take this seriously and take it on, that this is our responsibility. But it's under a process, a political process, and an educational process that you will be brought through, that takes about 6 months to complete. But in the meantime, you know, you'll be part of a revolutionary organization under the leadership of the African liberation movement, the vanguard of the African Revolution. So Uhuru, go to apscuhuru.org if you want to join, if you want to find out what it means to be an APSC, and we will show you, we will lead you, we will guide you, and forward with the African Revolution. Uhuru.
Uhuru, Allison, thank you so much for that important call. I'm really looking forward to seeing, you know, people applying and to be able to be part of this cadre organization that is the only way forward, the only future for white people. And so we'd like now to be able to open up for questions. We have at the Zoom, if you go down to the question and answers on your Zoom, or put it in the comments of your Facebook or YouTube if you're watching from there. We do have a comment from Chairman Omali Yeshitela, and we understand that he and Deputy Chairwoman Ona Zane Yeshitela are watching on Facebook. And the chairman wrote as a comment, most of Europe participated in the economic embargo of Haiti. And he also mentioned that the author of the book Race First is Tony Martin. Penny, I'm not sure if you're talking, you're on mute.
No, I just thank you, Chairman. Appreciate that.
And we have a question from Mads. It says, thank you, Chairwoman Penny, for this incredible study. What does modern day counterinsurgency look like? Has it changed much or looked differently than it did in the 1960s and 70s? I also want to salute our leadership for surviving the brutal counterinsurgency of the 60s and 70s. Reparations now.
Uhuru. Well, I think that it's always developing. I think basically the principles are the same of counterinsurgency. They're using any means whatsoever to destroy the resistance or the uprising or even the revolutionary anti-colonial movement of oppressed and colonized peoples. Anything. There's no terms for that. There's no Geneva Convention for the treatment of prisoners. There's nothing. They do anything they want to do, and it covers everything. It's military, it's economic, it's psychological, it's it's ideological, it's political. Every single thing is used, and that has, British imperialism was something that made counterinsurgency a science. Their whole thing of divide and conquer, dividing, pitting colonized populations against each other, people who had lived together for thousands of years, creating a neo-colonial class. There's the elements of it are the same. They have new technologies, drones and Facebook and different kinds of, surveillance and listening devices and all these kind of things that they're always doing. But the basic principles are to do anything possible that a human being could do to another human being, do it to the Africans or to the colonized people who are rising up for their freedom and liberation. And they spare nothing, still today and historically.
Uhuru. We have one comment from Shay that says, was this recorded? And if so, where will it be posted? So I do know that this was recorded. Yes, it is on the APSC Facebook page and the Uhuru Solidarity YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/Uhuru Solidarity. I'm not seeing any other questions at this time. Do we want to give a minute, Penny? Did you want to say anything else before we make announcements?
Well, I really, first of all, I just really wanted to salute the Secretary General of APSC, Allison Haney, for that excellent presentation on why people should and need to join the African People's Solidarity Committee as the cadre organization that the African People's Socialist Party formed in 1976 to extend the African Revolution into the belly of the beast and behind enemy lines inside of the white population. What a brilliant thing to do, and what an honor to be part of that, to know that, this isn't about racism, as the chairman has said. The chairman has solved every question. He has built the African People's Socialist Party. There's unity of theory and practice, as Chairman Omali Yeshitela says. You can't really, truly embrace these ideas unless you act upon them, And that can mean many things. It certainly can mean being a member of the Uhuru Solidarity Movement, or to the NTU program, the volunteer program, and many other things. But we have to do something, because colonialism goes on every day. And after the cameras are gone and some of these rebellions are subdued by the state, and the state moves on different actions that are going on right now, and white people go back, into the everyday life of sitting on the pedestal, colonialism is still going to be there. It's still going to be there. And it still needs the African People's Socialist Party to lead African people and the people on the planet Earth to liberation, to self-determination, to the ability to be free and to have independence in their hands and the return of their stolen resources. It's still going to be there. There's nothing, until colonialism is destroyed, it still carries out what it does every single day. It may be forced by spontaneous movements to have to alter certain external signs of that, but it has to be taken down. It has to be defeated. It is the military power. It is the state power. It is there, as the chairman tells us, to protect the interests of the white ruling class. And I also want to, say that the chairman has really shown us that the class question in the whole world is in the colonial contradiction, as he says, is the African working class. All white people sit on the pedestal. Not all white people are rich, but there isn't a proletariat or working class per se in the white population, because white workers and oppressed sectors have united with our own ruling class and participated in the colonial assault on African people and indigenous people, and supported colonialism around the world. So, this is not a revolution that can be led by us. Bernie Sanders is not going to do it. Some kind of white communist party is not going to do it. It's going to be led by the working class that is the true working class of the world, which is the African working class inside the borders of the United States and around the world, that is in alignment and in deep unity with all other oppressed and colonized workers, and it's calling on us to be part of that, which is very, very exciting. It's the only way that we can be and have a principled relationship with everybody else. So, I call on people to, just jump into this work. Join the African People's Solidarity Committee, join Uhuru Solidarity Movement if you're not already. Let's get to, paying reparations. We're fighting Wall Street, make Wall Street pay reparations. Let's build that movement that the Uhuru Solidarity Movement is putting on right now. Chair Jesse is leading, Comrade Halley is out there leading this and taking on demonstrations, forcing them from the white community to demand that they pay reparations to African people in the billions and trillions of dollars that they owe, because it came off the backs of the suffering of African people on this stolen land. So I'm very excited about that. Really appreciate this event. Really salute, again, Chairman Omali Yeshitela, Deputy Chair Onizine Yeshitela. I salute the entire National Central Committee of the African People's Socialist Party, the Burning Spear newspaper, the entire party, the African Socialist International, all around the world. Africa is going to be free. I know that. Under the leadership of the party, it's on its way. Imperialism's days are numbered. Imperialism and a free Africa cannot live on the same planet together. One has to go, and that's going to be imperialism. Its days are numbered, and we see that. So I salute the African People's Socialist Party and all of you, and just say unity through reparations.
Uhuru, Penny, there are a couple of comments now too.
Okay.
The chairman commented again. He said, population and resource control are central to counterinsurgency.
Uhuru, yes. Thank you, Chairman. And we see that carried out every single day, because counterinsurgency is going on against the African population every single day. And that's what prompted this incredible resistance, population and resource control. That is life under, in the African community, in the colony of African people inside the borders of the United States in every possible way. That was why the party called the COVID-19, the colonial virus, population control. This is part of it. And, this is what the party is leading the way around against defeating.
We also have
Thank you, Chairman, for that.
Thank you. We have a comment from Mel Q, who's a Filipino comrade in Gainesville. Says, Uhuru Chairwoman Penny, thank you for this amazing teaching of history of African, Indigenous, and oppressed people's resistance. Regarding the Philippines history, though, Lapu-Lapu fought and killed Magellan in the central islands of the Visayas.
Okay.
The southern part, Mindanao, and I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing this, during the Philippine-American War, fought the US for about 10 years until 1913. After Luzon, the northern part formally surrendered to the US. Visayanes delayed the colonization of the Philippines for about 30 years, but Legazpi and the Spanish invaded with their forces in the 1570s, and in response, Filipinos in every region rebelled at some point throughout Spanish and then US colonization.
Thank you very much for that history. I really appreciate that. It's a really incredible history that is never taught, you know, in the schools and white schools or anything. And it's really, really powerful. And I know there was also a guerrilla warfare, I believe in the 1930s and 40s in the Philippines as well as the resistance to US imperialism led by Theodore Roosevelt of what was called the Spanish-American War that killed 200,000 people and committed genocide and committed, you know, and there was incredible resistance going on at that time as well. I really, really appreciate that history that you have just informed us of. Uhuru.
Uhuru. So again, I want to thank everyone who tuned into this study this evening. I want to thank our Chairwoman Penny Hess. Want to thank Secretary General Allison Haney. Jesse Neville is our engineer, who's the National Chair of the Uhuru Solidarity Movement. And thank everyone. For more information, political analysis, and to join APSC, please go to apscuhuru.org or uhurusolidarity.org. Thank the Chairman, Omali Yeshitela, for participating in this study. And just a couple of announcements. Actually, Chairman Omali Yeshitela is going to be participating in a special virtual concert celebrating the 20th anniversary of the Let's Get Free album by Dead Prez. And special guests include M1 of Dead Prez, journalist Tim Hotep, Grammy-nominated producer Sean C., and singer-songwriter D'Angelo. So tune in on Chairman Omali Yeshitela's Facebook page or on the Burning Spear YouTube channel this Friday night. I need a time on that. Thursday, July 9th from 6 to 8 p.m. Central Time, the Uhuru Solidarity Movement presents a live Zoom event, The Delmar Divide, Wall Street versus Black Power. You can register on Zoom, and the USM Midwest region is hosting this web event that's exposing the role of Wall Street banks in funding and supporting the colonial oppression of Africans in St. Louis. It features Chichara Masimba, who is the Economic Development Director for the Black Power Blueprint, as well as Penny Hess, who is the Chairwoman of the African People's Solidarity Committee. That's Thursday, July 9th. And then we also encourage everyone to tune into the Omali Yeshitela Taught Me studies every Sunday. That's at 8 a.m. Eastern Time on the Omali Yeshitela Facebook page or the Burning Spear YouTube page to watch that live study every week. And also go to the burningspearmarketplace.com to buy the Overturning the Culture of Violence by Penny Hess, to buy Vanguard and Uneasy Equilibrium and all the books of Chairman Omali Yeshitela. You can subscribe to the Burning Spear there and continue this fantastic political education that we really appreciate, everyone, and look forward to continuing this. Uhuru.